Welcome to Coffee and Crypto with Lee and Jimmie. I am Lee Reiners, joined as always by Jimmie Lenz. Jimmie, is there any place in America that has had better weather than we have had this week?
I do not think so, Lee. I was just thinking about that, man. It is like perfect. You walk out the door in the morning, it's 63, 64 degrees. Afternoons are in the low 80s, a nice light breeze. I mean,
No
this is
humidity.
this is this is why people move here. This is why people
Yeah,
move here, right? This is it. It's shoveling
this is
snow
it.
and all that stuff. Nobody wants to do that anymore, but man, it is just beautiful out. It
It's
is the
been an
best. Kim and I were sitting outside having a drink last night.
awesome,
Um, and it was, I
awesome.
mean, all the plants are blooming, all of the trees have bloomed out, and man, it is just,
hmm
and it was nice and cool and a nice breeze. It's just perfect, perfect.
Yeah, it's awesome. I'm gonna get out there later today, mow my lawn for the first time this year, and
Just this is
yeah.
just your first time?
Well, it's looking a little scratch. Yeah, it's. I'm sure people walking by are saying that it's long overdue to
What the
mow.
hell, Lee? Come on.
I know, letting it grow here. But yeah, it's awesome weather, and looking forward to the end of the semester. It's coming up fast, Jimmie. Not fast enough though, as we were just talking about. So,
Fast and
lot going on
furious.
at Duke. Lot going on at Duke. Lot going on in crypto. There's always a lot going on in
There
crypto,
is.
but we got a inquiry from a listener, Jimmie, a friend of the
Yeah.
show, and we Joanna. We'll just say her first name. We don't have,
Yeah.
we
We,
didn't
we
ask.
yeah we probably shouldn't say our last name, but
We don't want. Yeah, we don't want to tag her as being some type of deviant for listening to our show.
listening to the show.
But she wanted to get our thoughts on vaults, right?
Vaults. Yeah.
And we love it, by the way, when listeners send us topics or ask questions or whatnot. So please keep doing that. So yeah, this is, I think we talked about DeFi vaults, Jimmie, a few months
Oh,
ago, just
a
in
while ago.
passing,
Yeah.
a while ago, and it's obviously growing. You're
hmm
reading more about it. There's growing institutional interest. So let's just break it down, Jimmie. Maybe for listeners who aren't familiar, can
Sure.
you just explain what a vault is?
Yeah, sometimes people know them as safes. Sometimes vaults. There are a couple of commercial applications, and what those are is they are a program that holds assets, usually holds assets, and that can be programmed to do certain things. So, in other words, you could say, "Hey, I'm forming a company, and I'm going to put 10 Bitcoin in there." And if I'm going to send any Bitcoin out of that safe, three of these five people have to sign off on it. And kind of the cool thing about that is you have a record, an immutable record of who signed off on it, exactly when, and the money cannot go out without that happening, right?
Yeah.
You've built this program such that it has to happen that way. In my basic blockchain class that I built, I always thought this was so core to blockchain that I actually had all my students build safes and program them for certain activities.
hmm
This is the way that we talk about agents all the time. This is the way agents can sometimes interact. Sometimes people are the agents, but I always use the analogy. It's like, when you're at a big company and you have to have, three of the five executives sign off on a certain thing. It might be money leaving the firm, or it might be, something else.
Yeah.
What do they usually do? They come around with a piece of paper and say, "Hey, sign this for me." And
No doubt.
where does
No
that
doubt.
piece of paper go? Who the hell knows? Well, this is very, very similar to that. And in finance, we use it all the time, in particular for big stock transfers and money transfers and things like that, where a certain number of people, because you don't want one guy to have the ability to send money off the platform, big money off the platform. And so
hmm
basically, vaults are a way to custody things with certain rules attached to it. So it's a form of custody, but it's all around built around virtual assets rather than hard assets. So if you think about in the
Yeah.
old days, we had custody of securities, of actual stock certificates and bonds and things like that, the actual certificates. And DTCC used to do that. And heck, they still do it, right? They have places where vaults that hold all these securities, well, physical securities. Well, this is the same thing, but in a
Yeah.
virtual sense.
Yeah, and you're really talking about, and sort of the terminology has evolved, or at least sort of how we view what a vault is, because you're sort of talking about the original premise, which is
Right.
essentially a custodian, an on-chain custodian,
Yep.
multi-sig wallets. But they've evolved, Jimmy, and that's
Yep.
still one certain use case of vaults. But now there's an emerging set of use cases that are essentially on-chain pooled investment vehicles,
Yep.
right? So a vault is a type of smart contract, as you said. You deposit assets into it, and then, in some cases, that's all it is. It's just, you deposit assets and they're held, in safekeeping, right?
Right.
Um, but in other cases, those assets can be allocated across strategies like lending, liquidity
Sure.
provision, even obviously now tokenized real world assets. And it automatically earns and reinvests yields based on a defined set of rules with no manual intervention required.
Yep.
And what we're seeing now is there's specific institutions, legal entities that are performing what they call curation, right? So
Yeah.
vault curators, right? So they are developing the smart contract, right? But it's just like all smart contracts. It's all on chain.
All
People can see
transparent.
people can see the rules, but someone has a legitimate, or what people would assume to be a legitimate entity, right, has sort of built the vault, right?
Yep.
And then deployed it on chain, and then and maybe they still do some kind of administrative ministerial functions, right?
Yeah.
But they don't really have, or they're not supposed to at least have much control, right? They certainly don't
Right.
have custody. They don't, they can't do anything with user assets, right?
Right.
um
If you think about it, a vault is its own wallet. A vault has its own address, so
yeah,
it's
yeah,
an entity in itself. I mean, I think that's the one of
yeah,
the big differences between the old physical vaults. The way I think about, in particular, the use case that you mentioned, the more modern use case is almost like an ABS or something like that. I mean, a
yeah,
vault can be an ABS
yeah,
in itself.
that's right.
It can be any kind of package
Hmm.
to hold a particular strategy, as you said.
Yep. Yeah. And you get, and so like you said, it is its own wallet. There is a smart contract address associated
Right.
with the vault. And a lot of these vaults will take stable coins naturally, right?
Sure.
Or it could be or kind of Bitcoin, ETH, whatever it may be. And you deposit to the smart contract address, and you get, generally speaking, you will get a token in return that sort of
Right.
represents your
Interest.
interest
Yeah.
in that vault. And if you want to get your money out, you need to send that token back to the smart contract address, right?
Right.
Is generally how it works. But again, all of this is supposed to be automated, fully visible, transparent, on chain, but someone has sort of built it. So this is kind of like the latest evolution in DeFi. It's sort of DeFi, I guess, with guardrails a
With
little
guardrails,
bit,
with hard guardrails. Yeah.
with guardrails, right? Because it's like you know that there was an entity that actually developed this, that sort of has vetted the smart contract code, because we all know, right, one of the main issues with DeFi is smart contract vulnerabilities, right?
Yep.
And code needs to be maintained. You know this better than anyone, Jimmy, right? It's not as if you can just put something on chain and just walk away forever,
You cannot
right?
walk away.
So code needs to be, and so there's just been a lot of, I mean, every single day you can go on
Yep.
to, crypto news sites and read about some, DeFi exploit or smart contract vulnerability and whatnot. So, so vaults kind of and curated vaults are designed to solve this. But then you confront the reality of, well, how are these things regulated, right? How
Yeah.
should they be regulated? And the answer is it's not really clear.
No.
Despite everything the SEC and the CFTC have been doing under the Trump administration, they've been pretty silent on this issue. And I think, one, is just not top of the priority list. But two, it's technically thorny. Like,
It,
it's a
it is.
thorny issue to address from a regulatory standpoint.
Well, because
And
anybody can build one, right? I mean, I like I said, I have my first semester blockchain students building these things. That's how easy it is to put these things together. And it's not like you are building a financial asset that has certain rules and regulations around it and certain registration requirements in most cases and things like that. It doesn't, and you don't need a lot of technical expertise either. It's not like you need 12
Yeah.
investment bankers to do this, right? You just
Yeah.
need somebody who understands how these things work to put them together.
Yeah, and so so one of the sort of the questions is, okay, can a vault be considered a qualified custodian, right?
Hmm.
So, registered investment advisors and, other SEC, CFTC registered entities that, have clients that are client facing, they're required to keep client assets at what's called a qualified custodian, right?
Yeah.
And for good reason. I mean, these rules are designed to address problems that we have seen repeatedly in the history of financial markets and
Yep.
managing assets on behalf of other people, right? So what are those issues? Obviously, commingling, right? Misappropriation,
Misappropriation, misrepresentation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
misappropriation, bankruptcy, right? What happens if
Yep.
the registered investment advisor goes bankrupt?
Yep.
What happens to the client assets? So, so these are all things that have happened, and there's a rule set, around addressing those risks. But now you have vaults, and it's like, okay, do those risks apply to vaults in the same way that they
Mhm.
apply to sort of traditional investment advisors, right, and other
Yep.
intermediaries? And so that brings us to Joanna, and she sent us a pretty interesting letter
Yeah.
from a company called Veda Tech Labs, Jimmie. And I had not heard of them before, but they are a crypto infrastructure firm, and they build, right. They're basically a vault curator.
Right.
Okay, they build these non-custodial vault systems. And their basic suggestion to the SEC, and this was a letter to the SEC and the CFTC, um, is that, look, custody rules should focus on outcomes, not necessarily who the custodian is. And so they want regulators to recognize vaults as a valid alternative to qualified custodians
Mhm.
under very specific,
Right.
parameters in regards to the vault, and sort of how it operates, which are quite technical, those parameters. And that's one
They're
of my
very
questions,
technical.
which is like, well, look, you're really asking the SEC to do, and the CFTC, to engage in a lot of technical analysis that,
Yeah.
frankly, I'm not sure they have the capability to do,
I was
Jimmie.
going to bring that up, Lee. I got to tell you, I got to tell you, my biggest concern, and one of the reasons I think the Trump administration hasn't addressed this is the lack of awareness and technical expertise. As I've mentioned a few times before, I think there are a lot of people out there who are somewhat clueless and have been given, posts, have been given posts,
Such
and I do
so
mean,
charitable.
well, it is what it is.
Yeah,
Have been
yeah,
given
yeah,
posts that they just don't have the background for. I mean, they might be great people, but they just don't have the background for them. And this is, knowing and understanding kind of the technical areas of something like this. Because, I mean, we've talked about it a million times. This is a brand new asset class. This is a new technology. We can't assume that new things are going to fit into old molds,
hmm
and this is a perfect case where new
yeah,
things don't fit into the old mold. I mean,
yeah.
you can't deposit this someplace in a bank, right? Or because there's nothing physical there. And so I do think that it's worthwhile for the SEC and CFTC to look at this, to and to opine on it, but try to bring a couple of experts in who actually know what the hell they're doing. I mean,
Yeah.
people who have dealt with stocks and bonds all their lives are probably not the right people. So bring in some experts. I mean,
Yeah.
there are pluses, there are minuses, as you said, and we've talked about a million times. Bridges and bad code will cause all kinds of issues, and
Yeah.
so you have to be aware of that. But at the same time, I think we can set parameters out that allow for this kind of functionality. And let's face it, it's better to have some rules than none.
Um, Well, it depends. Yeah, I generally think that's true. I mean, look, the SEC has tried to deal with this issue prior, not in the exact context of vaults,
Right,
but under the Gensler SEC, they did release an updated safeguarding rule that was designed to address registered investment advisors' custody of crypto. Now, the rule wasn't designed specifically, exclusive to crypto. It was sort of non-security assets, but
right.
really the text was all about crypto. And as we've talked about many times on this show, Jimmy, right? Crypto is unique. I mean, the whole reason we're here is because crypto is unique.
It is very
And it
unique.
all comes back to the adage, not your keys, not your coins. So crypto custody is very different than traditional asset custody because of the underlying technology. And so now you have vaults, which are essentially, as we talked about, a custodian that also is enabling yield,
Yeah.
right? And
Could
sort
enable anything. Yeah, but
could
yield for
enable
sure,
anything,
for
could
sure.
enable anything. And so,
Yeah.
so how do you sort of square that, square that circle there a little bit? And it's freaking hard. And like, look, one of the critiques I have of the SEC specifically, which is, look, they're so gung ho on crypto and bending over backwards to accommodate crypto without really having the technical expertise on staff to sort of assess like whether they're doing actually makes sense and is sort of compatible with the technology. And this is what I would do if I was running the SEC is I would go out and hire, like blockchain programmers, right? I mean, I would hire, talent. And so when you get these letters that are pretty complex from like Veda and others, which are submitting stuff all the time to the task force, making all sorts of claims about how the technology works, and like you don't want to just take them at their word that what they're saying is true, right? You need someone to actually vet this stuff. And so, and I just don't see them having that on staff. It's all lawyers, right? I mean, Atkins obviously is very, loves crypto,
Lawyers
loves
and former
tokenization.
Hill staffers, right? I mean,
Lawyers and
that's
former Hill staffers, and look, they're performing a valuable function. But all the, all the policy proposals that we're seeing put forward are all premised on assertions of how the technology works, but who's actually vetting these assertions,
right,
right?
right.
And so that's the critique I have. So it's an interesting proposal. We'll put a link in the show notes because they spell it out in more detail, and they basically say, look, vaults have technological features that address the risks that these safeguarding rules are designed to address. Um, and so folks can judge it for themselves. I mean, broadly speaking, though, Jimmy, one final point on vaults, which is something that you say all the time, which is where is the yield coming from,
Yeah.
right? And so this is just sort of a more generic observation, not anything related to do with regulation, because it's like as of now, it seems like this is all within sort of the crypto economy,
Hmm.
right? Now things will change if once we get more RWAs on chain and whatnot. But you have situations where, okay, you deposit stable coins to a vault, so like a lending protocol, lending
Right.
pool, right? They lend those stable coins out to, some other protocol, which then is lending those, right? It just seems like it's
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
it's like this, I don't know what the analogy is, right? But unbacked crypto assets, they're
Maybe
not
fractional banking.
fractional. Well, but fractional
No,
banking is result.
I
But
know
there's
what you're
loans,
saying.
right? But there's loans going to real businesses,
Right.
right? That are, taking those proceeds to build their business. So I don't understand, frankly, where these yields are coming from. And it just seems like it's kind of this like circle uh, that is untethered to any productive economic activity that is, I don't see how it's sustainable. Right. I
Yeah.
mean,
I don't honestly
if
some of the
one
yield.
link, where's
Yeah,
the
some
yield
of this,
coming
I
from?
mean, I would say
Where's it
so.
coming from?
Some of the yield things, anything that is around what a money market fund yields, understand 100%. Get that? I know what you're doing. That's not, there's no secrets there. But anything promising, these outrageous yields, 8, 9, 10%, or that are paying out those kinds of things, I would look very, very closely. And I've said this before. You just mentioned it. You have to ask, where's this yield coming from? Is it possible? It's possible, but man, do you understand the risks involved in what you're doing?
Yeah. I mean, you're just depositing crypto to a pool that lends crypto with more crypto as collateral. And then that crypto is being lent again, right? It's just, but I get it. Like, look, I think these things make sense once you have, more tokenized money market
Yeah,
funds, once you have RWAs, because then, right, there's actual productive economic
we
activity
know we
that's,
know we
yeah,
have a
we can
better
say it, but I,
understanding.
I right now. So, and and then another point too, Jim, which just came to me is, these we're seeing, and they call it the DeFi mullet, which is right. You access these vaults via centralized intermediaries, right? So
Hmm.
Coinbase, for instance, already has a relationship with Morpho, right? So you could be a Coinbase customer, which is one of these vault curators,
Right.
right? So you can, be a Coinbase customer and sort of opt in into these like Morpho yield products, right? Lending pools and sort
Lending
of
pools. Yeah.
coin lending pools, and Coinbase will sort of just, kind of, manage that for you. So you just log in. It's very user friendly. And this, I think, has bearing on the stablecoin third party rewards debate that we're having right now, because you could have a situation where, okay, maybe you say third parties can't pay the rewards, but if the third party like Coinbase is simply just facilitating access to a vault, right, to a lending protocol, they could say, well, we're not paying the
Right.
reward. We're just providing access. But from a user standpoint, right, there's no difference, right? All you're doing is just logging into Coinbase and seeing your account go up, right?
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
just, and
Yeah.
they're just abstracting things on the back end. So I kind of view vaults as a way to sort of game, right, some of these restrictions that may be coming on third party rewards
I
here.
don't. That'd be interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way, Lee. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
well, that's
possible.
how I think. That's how the
I
regulator
know.
brain in me thinks,
I know.
brother.
That's how you
All right,
roll.
well, let's move it. Let's move on. That's how I roll.
Okay.
That's right.
Good.
Let's move on.
Great. Yeah, that was a good suggestion. I like that suggestion from Joanna.
Uh, Thank you, Joanna. Hope we made you happy there. And send us your anyone, send us feedback, because maybe we got some of this vault stuff wrong. Pretty complex.
Yeah.
Okay, Jimmy. Well, speaking of yield in crypto, maybe it's coming to your 401k here pretty soon, brother. What do you think about that?
I mean, at the end of the day, you and I are both pretty libertarian in our approach to things.
You
Eh,
more than I am.
Maybe me a little bit more.
I'm a New Deal Democrat.
Okay. It's so big aside here. I think I told you I'm reading The Devil's Chessboard. Have you read that yet?
Oh
It's
no, that's about like it's about the Dulles
the
brothers, right?
Dulles, yeah, both the Dulleses, John Foster and Alan, but more Alan Dulles
Yeah,
and some of his, and they talk a lot about those folks, and
sure,
kind
sure.
of all the games that were played. But
Oh
that
yeah,
aside, so I always say, the buyer needs to be aware. The buyers need to do their homework on
yeah,
investments. I don't ever want to. I think more choices are better than less, but I think people do have to do their homework, and you have to have some common sense about it. If all of a sudden there's an investment around that's been with institutions for 20 years, and all of a sudden things aren't going so great, and they open them up to retail, well, wonder why, folks. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah,
I don't think we have to protect. I don't think we have to protect people from themselves. I don't think we have to be everybody's mom. I think people need to have choices, and they don't need to be made by the government. I don't think. I think every administration claims, "Oh, I'm going to give this. I'm going to give that." I mean, the current administration, Republicans, supposed to be giving people more choices, giving people more access to things. And, I think this administration has probably put the can on more choices than anything else. All you have to do is look at the way that they've, some of the things that they've steered through state legislatures and things along those lines. And I'll get off my soapbox on that. But I think more choices are better. But the onus is on you to do your freaking homework. So if you I think the Department of Labor and in this particular case for 401ks and any kind of retirement
hmm
accounts,
yeah,
but also other agencies that oversee these kinds of investments and things like that, they have to make sure there's no fraud involved and things along those lines.
hmm
But at the same time, you have to do your own homework and say, hey, is this really the right time to get into this particular thing? Why have I not had access for 20 years and now somebody's given me access? Am I kind of the fodder for the cannon that's out there?
No, well said, and I can't really disagree with you on any of that. And for folks who don't know what we're talking about, this week the Labor Department finalized a rule that is intended to open up private markets, including crypto, for 401k plans, right? And you got to admire the timing here because you can't pick up the Wall Street Journal or the FT or even the New York Times, frankly, these days without seeing some story about withdrawals in private credit in
Oh,
particular, right?
yeah,
And a lot of the issues there. So it's not looking particularly appealing, I think, to most folks to get into these assets right now.
it shouldn't.
Yeah, yeah, for good reasons. I mean, I think this is a terrible idea. It all stems, of course, from an executive order that President Trump issued, several months ago, calling on this. And I don't know, Jimmy. I think this will kind of have a muted impact, to be honest with you, because it can't change the law, right? Executive orders are, sort of lay
Right.
out how the executive sort of interprets the law and how they'll enforce the law, but it's not, it's not law itself, right? Obviously, only Congress can enact law, and there's still a lot of legal uncertainty because you have lawyers who that's all they do, right? Is that they sue,
Absolutely.
right? They sue plan sponsors, which are the employers, folks, right? I mean, when
Yeah.
we talk about plan, retirement plan, 401k plan sponsors, it's the employers, right? They're the sponsor, and so they're the ones that have a legal responsibility to offer plan options that are in the best interest of the employees, right? I mean, they're fiduciary, and so we've seen lawsuits where employers are being sued for offering high fee options or this or that.
Right.
And so a lot of what this new rule from the DOL, Department of Labor, which administers ERISA, which is the federal law over governing 401ks, is designed to provide almost a legal shield from some of these lawsuits, right? And so, basically what it's saying is, hey, there's a process here in place that has to be followed, but provided it's followed, we think that there's a safe harbor.
Yeah.
So, but again, it's not going to stop, enterprising lawyers from suing, right?
Hmm.
If this happens. And so I just think there's a lot of employers out there who are just going to remain skittish and say, you know what, our employees are not, because to my knowledge, it's not as if employees are, scrambling or sort of, knocking on the door at their employer saying, hey, why can't I get into PE? Why can't I get into private credit? Why aren't you getting into crypto? Obviously for crypto, you can go out and do that on your own. You don't need your
Sure.
401k. You don't need your 401k to do that. So I think my sort of long-term prediction is that this really won't change much. I think when you combine it with the market conditions, right,
Right.
across all alternative assets right now, but we'll see. I think the big question I have, Jimmy, is to what extent do we see private markets assets, including crypto, make its way into target date funds? Because
Yeah.
then that's a different story altogether. Because a lot of plans are just you're automatically enrolled into target
And
date,
yep. Yep. I
right?
mean, that was the premise of Richard Thaler's book, right?
Yeah, man.
Nudge.
Yeah, choice architecture.
Yeah, yeah, just kind of,
Choice architecture.
you have
Yeah,
to
yeah.
sign out, instead of signing into a retirement plan. The one thing I think that would have made a much bigger difference was something, a change in the rules that would incentivize people to, instead of going the private equity and private debt route, would be to incentivize them to go public. The fees and the ongoing fees to be a public entity are high. I mean, extraordinarily high.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the reason that a lot of people don't do it. Is just the fees, the initial fees, and then the ongoing fees to do that. I think that incentivizing people to go public would have been a much better idea than just providing an outlet for people that have crappy or holding crappy funds to get out of the crappy funds by selling them to the public. I mean, we've seen and we've talked about it a million times. The decrease in the number of publicly listed companies here in the United States over the past 10 or 15
Yeah.
years. I mean, it's extraordinary, folks. We're talking like, a
Yeah.
decrease in, 50, 60, 70%. So it's not like just a
Fine.
few percent. And
No
so
doubt.
I think incentivizing companies to go public would have been a
Mm.
much, much, much better idea, and it would have stayed with people in a much better way.
Well, and look, I mean, Paul Atkins talks about this a lot, right? I mean, he says he wants to make IPOs great again. He wants to lessen the regulatory burden associated with being a public company. But yet again, this is a situation where the administration is sort of working at cross purposes because one school of thought on the reason for that decline in the number of public companies, and look, it's multi-factor, folks, right?
Oh, it
Anything
is.
like
It is.
it's not just one thing. Um, but you've seen it's just a lot easier to stay private now because the
Mhm.
pools of capital available in private markets are so great. Why? Because the SEC has issued a number of exemptions over the years, right, that allow companies to raise funds from accredited investors, right, Reg D, you name it,
Right.
without having to go public. And so, I understand, why a company would not want to, undergo the colonoscopy that's associated with being a public company when they can, when they have access to capital in private markets, right, that allow them to grow. And at this point, going public is really a liquidity event, right? I mean, the whole
Yeah.
premise is not necessarily to raise funds to grow the business, right? It's to provide liquidity to employees and investors, right? But guess what? Now there's secondary markets for private companies, and maybe with tokenization that'll be even more of a thing. So now we're allowing these things to enter 401k plans, and it's like, well, that's even a bigger pool of capital that's going
Absolutely.
to
It's one of the
allow these
biggest.
I mean, this is why they want it, right? This is the
Yeah.
whole premise, which is like, okay, we're kind of running dry. We've tapped the LPs; they don't want any more. Let's get into 401k plans. And why would you ever need to go public then
Yeah.
if you're a private company and you can? So this is basically just rewarding the PE firms and the crypto firms who are big supporters of the Trump administration, and undermining the whole make IPOs great again. No one's going to want
Yeah.
an IPO, and they can just tap 401ks without going public. So that's my little soapbox. Yeah, your
Yeah.
soapbox. That's my soapbox there. All right, Jimmy. Well, let's talk about an interesting story here involving Tether, which is always interesting. There's never a dull
Always
moment in
interesting.
always interesting with Tether. And of course, Tether is infamous for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
Infamous for never having a audit
Yeah.
performed, right?
Right.
And there's been all sorts of excuses given. Oh, the accounting firms don't know what to do. They don't know how to look at our business, our crypto, or crypto. They do publish attestations from BDO's Italian unit, right?
Right.
And the attestation is not a full audit, right? It doesn't look at liabilities. It just basically says, do they have assets sufficient to cover the outstanding amount of stable coins, right?
But things are changing.
Things are changing because it was reported last week that Tether has hired KPMG, Jimmie,
Yep.
to conduct an audit of its financial statements, right? At the same time, it has also hired PwC to help its internal systems get ready for the audit. So, Jimmie, the question I have for you is regards to KPMG. How many internal committees at KPMG do you think had to sign off on this engagement?
Oh, had to be a boatload, right? I mean, this is a chief risk officer's nightmare.
So the risk
having
committee, definitely the risk committee, the
the risk committee,
reputation,
the
the
audit
reputation
committee,
committee, the audit,
certainly
yeah.
executive. Oh, there had to be a boatload. I mean,
Their
everybody had to
insurers
sign off on
probably
this.
had to sign off on this.
I mean, it's it's
I
it's
mean,
it's so huge and it's so public. And let's face it, and it's not just KPMG, but all the audit firms have been, I think, are under a much higher level of scrutiny than they have been in the past. I think they are. I think people, one of the first things people say when a company goes under is, who was the audit firm?
mhm.
If it's a public company or private company, they look to, why didn't the audit firm catch this? And so you have to think that everybody and his brother had to sign off on this before they agreed to do it. I was thinking about it in a little bit different way. Certainly, there was a lot there. But I did wonder, with them doing this, and it's ahead of their U.S. expansion. They've launched the U.S. Dollar denominated stablecoin and things like that.
USAT, yeah.
What else is in the offing? That's what I kept asking myself. What else is in the offing for the
Yeah.
U.S. in particular, given the
Yeah.
fact that they're doing this kind of thing?
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons for them to, because the question is, well, why now? And so it's been reported that Tether is looking to fundraise, even though, they're the most, on a per employee basis, Jimmy, this is the most profitable company in the history of the world,
Oh yeah,
right? So they make money hand over fist, but they still apparently want to expand. And they're seeking outside investors. And naturally, these investors are saying, show me audited financial statements. I'm not,
yep.
this is what smart investors, not even
This is
smart
what people
investors, just
do. Show me the
this is what
audited
people do, right?
financials.
If
That's
if
just
you're
what.
trying to,
Yeah.
so it's what people do, folks. And so if that's what they want to do, and if they want to expand into the U.S., they're going to have to get an audit. And honestly, this is probably the most anticipated audit in the history of audits.
Yeah.
Right now, there's no indication that this audit will ever be made public, because Tether's not a public company. There's no
Right.
requirement that this audit be made public. But KPMG and to a lesser extent PwC
Yeah.
are really going out on a limb here, folks. And
I mean,
all I mean,
these are two of the big four. I mean, when we're
going out on a limb here, because again, this is going to be so scrutinized, and if anything happens to Tether, post audit, like you said, people are going to be saying, what the hell would happen at KPMG?
yeah,
What did they miss? Red flags. The fees on this thing, I just have to be astronomical, I'm
I would think
assuming.
so. That's why I
Right.
was That's why I was thinking to myself, what else? I think they're preparing for something a lot bigger than just the stablecoin, because otherwise, going through this is going to be really, really difficult. I would think maybe not, but maybe it's the U.S. entity. The thing that we don't. We haven't spoken about. I mean, Tether's been around a long time, but the U.S. entity has not been around that long, and so
No, it's like a
maybe
year.
maybe it really is very independent of the parent company. Maybe the parent company is just basically an investor, and that's it. And so doing this kind of thing is going to be easier now, certainly, than in the future. But to me, I the very first thing that came to mind when I saw that was they've got to be getting close to launching something else, or something else has to be in the in the construction phase for them to go to these lengths, hiring two of the big four to perform these kind of services. I mean, doesn't it feel like that to you?
Yeah, I just don't know why you would take this on, why you would take this level of scrutiny on, like you said, if you didn't, because the business as is golden, right?
Yeah.
Like you're the 186 billion, right? You're the largest stablecoin, by far. No signs of slowing down at all. It's your funding is cost free, right?
Yep.
They don't pay anything on the stablecoin holdings. And you just invest that, and honestly, we don't, part of the audit is we don't actually know everything that's invested in, but treasuries, we know a lot of gold, frankly. And you just keep the float, man. And so, hey, things are pretty damn good as is. People have been asking questions for a long time and hasn't slowed you down, so why take this on now? Like you said, I think you're right, unless you want to do bigger, better
There's something in
things.
the
But
offing. There is
I
something
don't,
else there.
crypto Twitter is obviously talking about this
Yeah.
story, but I think people need to prepare themselves that this thing goes south, because KPMG and PwC, when they get in there, and if they see things, and if Tether's not being forthright with them, they're going to cut the cord, right?
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
because look, these are, KPMG, PwC are massive companies. They're under a lot of scrutiny, regulatory scrutiny as well. Their
They're
reputations are on
partnerships
the,
too. People forget these
their
things are
part, their
partnerships.
their
These are
reputations are
yeah.
on the line here. So, if Tether is obfuscating, or, if they're not, getting satisfactory answers, they could withdraw, or they could issue an audit opinion that is not great. And that could trigger a run. We don't know. Like, I
Yeah.
think people need to be ready for all sorts of contingencies here. Because there's
Anything
nothing
can
in Tether's
happen.
history that would suggest that they're going to be transparent with the auditors here,
I mean,
you know?
I think hiring PwC to prepare themselves leads me to believe that they do want to try. I mean, they're trying to set themselves up in the best light possible. But I do wonder, because it is the U.S. entity, and the U.S. entity is so new, if this is going
But I don't
to.
think it doesn't say it's just the US entity. Like,
See, I took it as it was
I
just
think
going to be the U.S. entity.
the audit, the audit is just going to be for the US entity.
I
I think
thought
it's going to be
so.
for the full,
I
I think
thought
it's going
this
to be
was
for the
just for the
parent
U.S.
company.
entity.
Oh man.
Maybe I just implied that.
I guess I'm looking. It's a Financial Times article. Again, we'll post it in the show notes.
Yeah,
It's not specifying, I guess, which legal entity, but reading it, the implication is that it's the
the
main entity,
global.
the global entity, which is the one that people have
That's a
questions
much
about.
that's a
Um,
giant engagement.
but imagine what happens if PwC, and or KPMG put out a press release saying, you know what, we're done. We're not doing this
Yeah.
anymore, right?
And it happens,
And
folks. It does happen where a big four audit firm says, nope, can't go on. I'm not satisfied with what I'm seeing, or or even worse, I won't put my name on the cover of this report. You know,
hmm
there are engagements where you get a branded and unbranded reports from auditors and from consultants and things like that, and those are. I mean, it's not uncommon that a firm will say, "Yeah, I'll do this, but it's not going to be branded." Um,
yeah,
I see those all the time. And
yeah,
sometimes they imply bad things, sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's just not something they're experts at. Sometimes, I mean, there are a lot of reasons for those kinds of things. But yeah, I mean, it is interesting timing that this would happen. I don't know. We'll see what happens, but I can't. I mean, they've
yeah.
been around, as you said, for a long time. I mean, this is the largest stable coin there is. To pick to choose to do this of their own volition, it just seems like there's something else there.
Well, there's certainly more to come on this story, and
Yeah,
when it does come, we'll be sure to cover it on Coffee and Crypto. Jimmie, a lot of fun.
always
Enjoy this great weather, and look forward to doing it again next week.
get out there, have a good weekend with the kids.
Will do. Take care.
All right.